Okay, so the first one is this idea that they don't belong, with they, of course, being interpreted as many of our introduced species. And a couple of quotes just brought up here from that feedback to the Kim Hill interview. The first one there from someone: we should round up all possums that have eaten more than a certain amount of native vegetation on an offshore island and then send them back to Australia. So this person somewhat ironically suggesting that we treat possums in the same way that Australians treat their asylum seekers. And really the second one there, also interesting. The Creator set everything in its place for the good of mankind. Why are we so arrogant to think that we're greater than He, to disregard His will? And that second quote replicates the essence almost exactly of an article that appeared in the Auckland Star newspaper, a historical newspaper, back in 1893. And to quote from that article, "We have all our own places in creation, and we are only safe when we're keeping them. It is so with men, it is so with animals." That article was accompanied by an illustration that you can see on your right there, of a workbench with each of the tools neatly slotted away in their respective compartments. You know, your hammer goes here, your wrench goes there, your nails go there. Don't mix up the things, and make sure that they always go back in their place. The title of that article, incidentally, was "A Place for Everything and Everything in Its Place," which was and still is a popular aphorism dating from the 17th century. That aphorism and the thinking behind it was especially common during the Victorian era and was a matter of fact for most colonial New Zealanders. It very neatly portrayed the cultural notion that things have a place where they belong and to which they should ideally be returned when they're no longer in use. And it wasn't just animals that had their place at this time, of course. Women also most notoriously had their place, and this was very neatly summarised by the Wanganui Herald here in an article around the same time. That article was entitled "How to Educate a Wife," and that article said that place was in the kitchen, of course, where they might enjoy the art of wholesome and appetising cookery. The place of human races or ethnicities was also widely known. Chinese people at the time belonged in China, Indians in India, Mexicans in Mexico, and so on and so forth. Funnily enough, there was always a lot more ambivalence, though, about where Europeans belonged. Now, as we all know, over the course of the 20th century, the supposed natural place of many of these things has been challenged. And as a result, the idea that women and races and ethnicities have natural roles or places has really been comprehensively discredited. As we see now, these sorts of ideas come across as laughable or ridiculous. It's interesting then that in the context of wildlife, the notion that everything has its place where it belongs still retains enormous currency. This came across to me very strongly in the interviews for my PhD. In fact, almost every interviewee of mine, and I sampled right across the industry, expressed some version of this belief. Here's a sample of some of them. Everything has its natural place, I think, in the natural world, and it's only whether they fit into that environment that's the question. Another person: the role of humans is to judge ones that fit and ones that don't. And the last one there: we can put bits of the jigsaw back in to make a whole. And the illustration that you can see there on the right is taken from a recent issue of the Forest and Bird magazine. It depicts a native forest puzzle with each of the pieces, or the native species in this case, fitting neatly back in together to make a whole. Now, this notion that everything has its place where it belongs would have gone down very, very well still in the 1950s and the 1960s. It wouldn't have been out of place in the dialogue of a Mad Men episode, but it strikes me in the year 2017 as being awkward, if not embarrassing. It's also deeply hypocritical. My ancestors, for example, come from England, come from Cornwall, actually. Does that mean that my natural place is in Cornwall, that's where I belong in the world? For me, clearly not. I'd say that's ridiculous, and most people would probably agree with them, with some exceptions. It's interesting, then, that we won't take it when it's applied to ourselves, but we're very, very happy to dish it out to other species.